All right. Welcome to the Internal Momentum podcast. Today, I'm talking with somebody who's made a significant impact in my life, somebody I met a few years back. And through a few conversations, I ended up doing some coaching with her, and she shifted some things inside of me that have been there for decades. And it's made a massive impact in my life. And I'm really excited to introduce her to all of you. Her name's Toni Basile from Epic Transformation and Coaching and Consulting. So welcome, Toni.
Thanks very much, Ben. Pleasure to be here with you.
How would you describe yourself and what you're doing and the work you're working on right now?
The work I do, I've had 36 years of working with people. I always knew that was where I wanted to land. I think it is my, superpower is working with people. I really enjoy understanding people, and I have a curiosity of always getting each person I meet wondering what their potential is, and I can see through where their blockages are. And if they do some work with me or they're in my inner circle, that work keeps going on in discreet ways as well as some obvious ways. Clients will be very direct and it will be very centered on their goals. And it is really interesting when you have someone as engaged as you have been, because you are a testament to all of what is possible when the determination to change is absolutely there, with no fear of what it is that's been presented, just a determination to understand and move forward. That is quite remarkable and still not something that I see every day. I'd say 1 in 5 clients like you. I sort of classified them as the 20%ers. And they're individuals who will look back and really want to understand where their mindset, their current mindset has been evolved and developed over their lifetime. Ultimately, that's where we've come to understand is the root of our blockages. That at the root of our blockages really do sit in our perception of certain events in our lives. And some of those events can happen quite earlier on in our lives and others can happen a bit later, but we write a narrative around those situations and they become our reality, our truth, the map by which we are guided by until it's challenged. And we go back with a different perception or go back and revisit it and see if the perception is actually as we remember it. So I really get a huge buzz out of that. That is my life's work, in fact. And now I get to do that in a voluntary capacity with individuals rather than a forced capacity. And when the work is done, it's quite amazing the immersion that it has in someone's total life.
Yeah, definitely.
And where relationships are impacted and your business is impacted and your happiness, and it just has a flow-on effect in so many ways. It's a ripple effect, if we want a metaphor for it.
Yeah. Well, I kind of nodding along there as you're sort of saying those areas like the happiness and the business, because I've seen transformational shifts in all of those areas since we've worked on, I guess, unclearing some of those blockages. I think that's what it is. It's essentially a blockage that's there. And I didn't know that the blockage was there. I could see that I thought I'd dealt with things. And I remember you coming up to me and you had seen something and you kind of said to me and you said, look, I think after hearing what I heard, I think there's something still there. And I think you should maybe try EMDR therapy. And, you initially were kind of trying to help me find someone local and I struggled to find it. And then that's what sort of led us to work there. So you could identify it just, it was obvious to you that something was there that I couldn't see. And I didn't really know what the issue is. Do you find that that's the case, that a lot of people come to you thinking it's one particular issue and that may not be what it actually is? And what typically are people thinking it is?
Typically people think it's an external factor, that there is something external to them that's holding them back. They're not being treated fairly, they're not being merited with the recognition that they deserve. Now, those things may be true, but in turn, it usually comes down to how they behave in order to gain the recognition. It even may come down to the fact that they are so humble that they want it to be recognised by a third party rather than advocating their own success and their own achievements themselves. So that's quite a common feature. And as a result of not being recognised independently, they get resentful and angry and depressed that they're not appreciated in the way that they should be. And that could be as a mother or as an employee or as a friend. It tends to be that whatever that blockage is or the thing that's stopping you tends to present itself and manifest itself in various parts of your life over and over again. Even if you go to a new job or a new relationship, you find that this particular issue will follow you around. Now, if that's the case, it's pretty much the sign that there is something within you that you're carrying forward in your behaviour and your attitude or your presentation that causes people to react to you in a particular way.
Mhm.
And so I'm able to see that really clearly, and of course, always much more clearly in others than yourself. I've been at the game for a while that I'm absolutely able to do it to myself. But the reality is I've also had to experience some pretty harsh hits from life in order to do the learning.
Yeah.
And it gets to the point that the blockage is so significant that it actually slams you up against the wall and the consequences are very significant. And then you have to do the wake up. And they're very uncomfortable moments, very, very uncomfortable, but guaranteed that at the end of the discomfort, there is a new way that you couldn't have imagined being as an individual if you're prepared to do that work, go through the journey and have someone that you trust take you through it. It is very, very slow to do it on your own.
Yeah.
It's possible, absolutely, but it is very slow.
Yeah. I found that having that guidance was really, really beneficial. And yeah, well, something you said earlier on, you said you like doing it now because you can do it voluntary versus it being forced. And I mean, I think knowing your background, I kind of know what you're referring to there, obviously with your sort of career and where you had to do it in different spaces. I'd love for you to just touch on, some of those things that have kind of built who you are today.
Absolutely. Look, I think foremost, coming from a family that was I'm first generation migrant, had its challenges because parents come from overseas, taking values from the home country and keeping them for the next 30 years. While the home country is evolving with their values and their attitudes, that presented a challenge, and then also your parents' reaction around being in the new country. And I did come from a family where abuse and violence was very common because my father had an underlying depression issue that he never dealt with, and it manifested as violence. And that there was a lot of learning in that and a lot of maturity that had to come through that experience. Then I was always pulled to human services, and my first job I landed was in child protection. And I did 16 years in child protection. And I know the way I said that sounds like it was a bit of a sentence, but it wasn't. I chose to stay. It was really difficult work. And we were doing statutory work with people that did not appreciate us being in their lives. And that's why it became statutory. So when custodial parents weren't able to protect their children, the state needed to step in and there was significant harm. And so that was an enormous privilege insight to very vulnerable families under a great deal of pressure, often intergenerational issues are present as well, and education and their own health also contributed to this very complex dynamic. And so having been exposed to that in my 20s and my 30s was an amazing learning ground, but there was also the emotional toil that came with it, because there's only so much you can do when people don't want to take on their part that they're playing in such a dynamic. And the responsibility is always comes down to the adults rather than the children. The children are the most vulnerable players in that dynamic. So I was part of that very closely in operational work, later on in program development work associated with children, youth and families. And I touched on disability programs, corrections in youth justice. And there was a great deal of, unfortunately, synchronicity between these three areas, these three branches of human services. They involve very complex and very grey areas of life. And there weren't simple solutions. There were the best you could get solutions, minimum parenting standard solutions, and you're often lying down here. If this is the line of average, you're often just skirting along the line of average, bare minimum parenting, and quite often dipping under quite a lot. Well, individuals that I work with now, they sit higher up on the level of average, and then they dip down to average and maybe underneath as a moment in time. And that, I've got to say, there is a huge difference in terms of capability, outcomes that can be gained by where you sit. If you're sitting just under the average for most of your life, or you're sitting above the average and you dip into minimum standards or below for points in time. Through that experience, there was a lot of understanding, real life understanding of how education and security and accommodation, all your basic needs, how truly, truly essential they are in order for you to get to the higher end of your potential, which in yogi language is called, consciousness, and really getting to that self-awareness in a way that is close to enlightenment, that the ever-achieving attempt for enlightenment that very few people actually achieve in their conscious life. So that was really my training ground. And I was in the government department in Victoria for 30 years, and I moved into another area of implementing the work into software development. And that was another interesting dynamic. Quite frankly, that was more stressful than child protection.
Wow.
I must admit, I probably literally turned grey in that job. It was full of a lot of egos. These were capable people, very intelligent people. And we didn't deal with the clients during this period of my career, but everything that I did was to implement policy and practice standards into a client record management system. And the pushback that was always there to do bare minimum or more simplistic rather than what's needed. And I was the gatekeeper on determining what was actually needed by practitioners. And that advocacy, I will have to admit, was much harder than working with the front-end clients.
Yeah.
And then from there, I went on to doing organisational change management at central office. And that I really, really enjoyed. And that was, it happened at the right time in my life. It wouldn't have been right to do it any earlier, but it was a time where I'd known so much about the system, the breadth of the system, the complexities within the system, that I could contribute to a program of work that could be an improvement on what we've had so far in the previous 30-odd years that I'd been exposed to the industry. And I ended up working on the outcome of the Family Violence Royal Commission. And the Orange Door was the major project for us as government. We were set the task of opening up 17 hubs across the state of Victoria that were the access points for domestic violence. Female and male victims of domestic violence, perpetrators, which was highly contested, and vulnerable children. And it would all be the front door of access to services for this cohort, which respectfully should be mentioned, that came out of the death of Luke Batty and at the hands of his father through a domestic violence situation and a mental health situation. And so this change was so enormous at a worker level, to have workers who worked with female victims, who worked with perpetrators, and then those who worked with vulnerable children. And they all took their corners.
Yeah.
And it was very, very hard for them to then look at the nucleus of who was the most vulnerable of that cohort, which was the child. The child was the most vulnerable. And we had enormous conversations to try and implement a risk framework that would keep everyone safe, but ensure that the child was never lost in the process. And that was another layer of learning that nothing else could have taught me. The culture and the philosophies that people align themselves to in a workplace is so strong that we had workers pushing back when we said, when are you as the mother's worker going to speak to the father?
Yeah.
And I go, no, what do you mean? we don't talk to fathers. We work with the mothers. We work with women. I'm going, but that child's got a father, and it's a biological father or a stepfather, and that's part of that child's world. And
Yeah.
that was an enormous conversation that people literally left the job over in some instances.
Yeah.
So it was a revelation that from an organisational perspective and an industry perspective, that a change of that calibre was going to take 5 to 10 years to see it embedded and enshrined as a framework, that the child is at the nucleus of the work, and then the family, and then the extended family, and then the kith and kin network in a real way. Academically, we know it, we say it, but
Yeah.
to actually see this change in action when we co-located these three areas that were all related to one another from a family violence perspective, it brought out all of the biases and the blockages and the difficulties that were some of the challenges of actually getting the outcomes that would lead people to be in a safer place and maybe even to work into their potential.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there's a few other parts of your story that I'd love to go to, but just tapping into what you were talking about there, fathers being part of their kids' life is something that's really, really important to me. I've got plenty of kids. I've had instances where I've seen the wheels in motion where the fathers kind of get left behind, or it's easy to be discarded. I've fought really hard and sacrificed a lot to make sure that that hasn't happened in my situation. But I also feel very sorry for a lot of dads who get to a point where they have no choice but to step back for their own health and their own safety and their own well-being. I'm sure that's a thing that you've seen over the decades, and I think there has been some improvements, but it's nice to hear that you were leading the charge back then. Is there anything that you can talk to around blocking out of dads from the kids in those family situations?
Yeah. One of the things I've learned over the years is that everyone has a story. And reflecting on my own father's experience and going back to some of those experiences that I had in our family unit, with my adult eye and perception, I could actually see he was a very lonely, broken man who did not feel like he belonged in Australia. And he also probably had a medical condition of depression. And there are certain reasons and life experiences that led him to that place. And it was an era where we didn't talk about mental health, and it was an era that was even more judgmental about it, and also services weren't expansive. And so it was much easier to make him a perpetrator and demonize him rather than understand him. And I can see that at times we did that. And I could see through some of those instances and cases that I work with in human services where there was a lot of blaming between parents. You can imagine the worst divorce that you've ever thought about, where you never talk to the person who said, mea culpa, I'm the person that's responsible for all the crap in my family. I did it. It's me. It's
Yeah.
my fault. You're always speaking to the person who says, I got done and, I wasn't treated fairly, or they cheated on me, or they did this and they did that. And so I quickly learnt that every person's action has a reasoning behind it. Now, this wasn't something I was taught. It's in no framework that I've actually ever studied. It's an observation that I've made that has rung true to me in all the work that I've done, that if you understand the person's map of life, their journey, you'll probably understand why they are who they are. And it doesn't give them the right to hurt other people because of that, because there's plenty of people who have suffered abuse and assaults and awful encounters that don't harm other people. So it's not a reason to justify their behaviour. But if it's understood as to the causality, then there's the opportunity for change. And
I love that, Toni, when you talk about the idea of their map and how they've kind of become who they are. By understanding that, we that can help us figure out how to deal with them and justify what they're doing and understand it. But how do you actually understand someone's map?
You get them talking,
Okay.
and you actively listen. You talk to them and ask them open-ended questions in a non-judgmental way. So questions around, tell me about your childhood, and let them recall any event that they choose to. If it's a happy event or a sad event, it's probably telling you something in and of itself, the event that they choose to retell. And then you ask them questions about that. Then what happened next? Where were your parents? How did you feel about that? Open-ended, non-judgmental questioning is critical, and counteracts our biggest fear as individuals. In our prefrontal cortex, we have judgment. Judgment is one of the few feelings that in fact is a cognitive function and a feeling. And so we're built to judge. We're built to judge for risk assessment to keep ourselves safe. And the reality is that tends to have us in negative thinking land quite often. And our biggest fear also, in the reverse, is being judged. And so when we do work with people one-on-one, that is the first thing that you've got to overcome, is their fear that you're judging them, that you're judging them for their family or the behaviour of their family or their behaviour or their actions. And then if they feel they trust you, then you get the real story. You start getting insights that are pure gold. And it is quite helpful to sit over someone's map as an observer in a helicopter view or a balcony view, because you get to see it a lot clearer from that perspective than being right down in the trenches with them. And then I can make links between why they might think the way they do or behave the way they do, and you go exploring that with them and alongside them as to, with an adult's mind, how reasonable is their presumption that they should have been responsible. And I've done this with myself. How much responsibility should I take for protecting my mother when I was only 8 years old from my father? And with my adult hat and my mother's hat on, I can say, well, that's just totally unreasonable. A child should never have to protect an adult. It's an adult's role to protect a child. And this is where our boundaries come in. So if we learn new boundaries as we get older and we mature and we go back and visit some of our childhood perceptions, we can rewrite some of those narratives and maybe change the map, create a new route in our map in terms of how that incident has influenced us. And I believe part of my experience of having my own personal experience of family violence as a child has given me great insight, compassion, and empathy for much of the work that I've done since then. It was probably the reason why I did the work, in fact, because I wanted to ensure that other people in that situation could have assistance.
I've felt when I worked with you that the space that you create, that non-judgmental space, that you really feel it, and it does allow you to open up and be really vulnerable, and just know that you can talk openly and get the help and the assistance. And, I did feel like you were almost a helicopter above, looking at all of it and being able to tell me, hey, why don't you go knock on this door or pull on this thread or try over here. And after we'd done it a few times and had a little bit of success, there was a real confidence in it. Okay, well, yes, if Toni says, go look here, I know there's going to be some little breakthrough here. And I just found that process was really useful. So that string that we sort of would pull on would be...
Well, not always comfortable ones. There was nothing you turned away from. Absolutely nothing. You were one out of the box, I can tell you, Ben. You were prepared to do anything, but I mean, I barely had time to hang up before you were actioning whatever it was that we decided, or you decided to do.
I got some good insights, and then I got to go put them into practice. One of the things I'm wondering when it comes to working with all different people in this space, I look at it and just assume everybody's got the same issues I've got. They're all dealing with the same problems, and that, I can just map my reality onto other people's, and they're dealing with feelings of inadequacy, or that they're feeling this way or that way. And I'm sure that's not the case. There's probably differences, but do you see patterns between the issues that underlie most of your clients and people you work with?
There are some patterns, absolutely. I'd say fear is the one that comes up with almost everyone. Now, some of that could be fear of certain situations, but predictably, fear of the ambiguity is one common theme that I could say confidently everyone I've worked with has experienced. The level of self-confidence, the level of ego, the drive, that varies a lot, but fear comes up quite a lot. And fear of the not knowing, fear of doing the incorrect thing, fear of not making the right decision, fear of disappointing people, like it may have a different genre in terms of where it hits in their life. I personally feel that this is connected to our risk assessment in our prefrontal cortex. I believe that it stems from there because that front part of our brain is constantly trying to predict the future, mitigate risk, and keep you safe. And the quickest way to do that is to make you fearful.
It's interesting because when we first met, I was oddly triggered by you. There was something inside of you that, or in my experience of you, that actually was like something about her just, it's a bit off and I couldn't pinpoint it. What is it that's underneath when that triggering's happening and you sort of, those people just kind of rub you a strange way and you can't really pinpoint what it is?
I don't think there's one answer for that. I think the answer's complex and it's situational and individual.
Well, in reflection, when I look back at it, I think what I was seeing inside of you was there was a couple of behaviors that I think just reminded me of my dad and some of the things that would irk me about him. And they're actually aspects that I think are pretty healthy. And it is sort of an advocacy for self. And I think because I was, just avoiding certain sides of myself, I would kind of, when I saw other people doing that, it was kind of like a bit of a disconnect. And I just didn't want to, accept that. It was a strange feeling because I couldn't even really pinpoint it at the time. But the thing that has been so, I guess, amazing about the journey is that it went from that, the sort of, you were probably one of the least likely people in that room we met that I thought we would go on to have an amazing friendship and get to know each other and have probably one of the biggest impacts on my life that anyone has. And that all came from somebody who initially I kind of had this weird gut feeling about. And yeah, it's very strange that that's the way things evolved.
It's really interesting because I would ask, what was it about your dad that you were not wanting to integrate, but may have been okay for your mum to have? So again, coming back to the dad scenario, because you've just raised that I reminded you of some aspects of your father, that quite often in relationships, the closer caregiver is the woman, is the mother. And this could be a gross generalization as we're moving forward because we are evolving to co-parenting and where fathers are actually much more involved with their children than they used to be, at least from my generation, absolutely. Mothers' frustration about fathers were often discussed with children and mentioned around children. Don't you be like your dad? Or, oh God, you're just like your dad. It's so frustrating. Right through to wait until your dad gets home and you're going to cop it. So dads were tending to be reflected to children through the eyes of their mothers, and culturally that happens quite a lot in different cultures. Fathers represent very authoritarian figures, and the last resort for discipline. But there are aspects of dads that we can take on as good or bad, depending on how we've been coached into perceiving them from our mothers. I know from our time together, you may have shifted in that view of your father. And I'd asked you, would you feel the same triggers nowadays? If you went back to that moment, because I will never forget that moment. That is one of those really breathtaking moments of someone coming up to you and going, just something about you that reminds me of my father and I don't like it.
Yeah. No, it was one of those things I remember being in the moment. We actually had a few drinks by that stage. It was the after party at an event we went to. And I think it may have been the alcohol that gave me the guts to come and actually confront you. But we're really in this sort of transformed space afterwards. And I just felt compelled to come and just, hey, look, you know what? There's something going on inside of me that you're bubbling to the surface. And I just want to basically say thanks for pointing to it. And I think it just in regards to your question around my dad and that, I've definitely had these shifts now. And I think I've dealt with a lot of the stuff that was pushing me away before. But yeah, ultimately I found that when I was younger, I would do anything to be the opposite of my dad. And I can relate to what you were saying about the, viewing dad through mum's eyes. My entire world was created through pretty much her words. around him. And there were some things that she would say about my dad that were, yeah, it was, oh, you better do this because dad's coming home. Dad will get angry. This sort of fear that, okay, dad's the scary monster. And that would happen sometimes. And look, I love my dad, and can he be scary sometimes? Yeah, I mean, but that's not who he was. Yet that was sort of how it was perceived in that little kid's mind.
Hmm.
And so as I was getting older, I remember just making that decision that I wasn't going to be like him, and I wanted to be, a completely different man. But I kind of threw all the good out with the few negatives, if that makes sense. And I remember even as a kid, I would, not as a kid, when I was a teenager, I remember my dad doing the whole dad thing. I got my first car and he was showing me, here's how you change the oil. Here's what you need to do. You need to change your oil regularly or the car's not going to work properly. And I remember for probably about a year, I didn't change the oil once. And the car kept running. And I thought, see, you know nothing, Dad. I was just Mr. Know-it-all. And yeah, I remember just doing anything to kind of prove my dad wrong and prove that, I'm not like him. And it's so childish looking back at it, but I can see how it's just continued into my adulthood. I've got a great relationship with my dad now, and there's so much wisdom that I can learn and gain from him that was unfortunately kind of chucked in the bin for many, many years. So it's been good to reconnect and to have some really, I guess, deep and meaningful conversations since we did our work together, which has opened those lines of communications and allowed me to develop those relationships way more than I did in the past. So that's been, I guess probably talking back to what you said about transforming families and relationships is some of the byproducts of the work you do.
If you imagine that a family, let's use the metaphor of a dance. Let's imagine the family is involved in this regular movement that you could liken to a dance. If one person shifts their role in that dance, the dance can no longer occur in the same way. So if the family argues at dinner time, and that's because everyone's in the one place, and instead of talking about all the good things that happen during the day, it's a place where you can niggle and push people and, express the disappointment that you have. And then dinner becomes an argument and it's really unpleasant. Now, if one person changed that and started talking, asking a question that was open-ended, that someone could tell a story to, and that was the only thing that was allowed to be talked about, all of a sudden you can't have that dynamic where an argument's going to be formed because it's not a free-for-all. There is a bit of a structure there. There's an expectation that you'll answer the question that's been given, and that becomes a narrative about that particular person. Nobody can interrupt them while they're talking. This sounds oversimplistic, but I've got to say I tried it when my kids were adolescents, and I've asked a number of people to try it at the dinner table, and there's a high level of success. As long as the boundary that the person speaking is allowed to speak without interruption until they're finished, and then just questions about what they have talked about are allowed, can then turn something that is usually a place for conflict into a place of better understanding one another. But it takes
cool.
one person to change.
Okay, I might get you to repeat that actually, because I think that's a really useful thing that people could walk away from. So if someone is finding that their family is always going into the same loop where the arguments happen every time they all sit down for dinner, it all goes into chaos. You're saying it just takes one person to change and everything else changes there.
Yeah, that person needs to be persistent because I worked with a family who they didn't even sit and have a meal together ever. It just was not part of their culture. But, the success was that everyone agreed to one meal because they would all cook different things. They agreed to one meal. Lasagna was the meal, and it got cooked, and everyone agreed that at 6:30, everyone would sit at the table. Now, that first meal lasted for 3.5 minutes before it went into chaos, okay? But the next meal lasted 7, and eventually they got to 20 minutes, and they had never, ever done that before. So it's not a magic wand. It's not going to reach perfection. It's an iterative, a repeated approach that improves as you go. and evolves as you go along. But just like any mastery, it needs practice. It needs practice for it to become something new. And you are going to have people pushing up against it, saying, no, hang on. No, that's not predictable. It's ambiguous for us to do this. I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm going to chime in here with an argumentative piece and throw in the grenade that creates the chaos that I'm used to. And so every success needs to be celebrated. 3 minutes was a big thing for this family who never sat around a table together to speak with one another. There was another example I just wanted to raise about this issue of including fathers, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
One of my biggest learnings of including fathers in the processes of working through children's futures was a family that was made up of a few boys. Mum was a single mum only because Dad was in prison. And Dad had been imprisoned for 15 years as a result of a murder. And pretty much we knew where he was, but nobody felt compelled to include him in any of the planning or concerns regarding the boys, regarding his kids. And so I would send him updates at appropriate times, court matters, review reports, etc., etc. I never met him and I never spoke to him on the phone. But during my time of working with the family, he was released from prison. And he came along to the next review meeting because he had moved back in with the family. And he had brought a card and a gift for me. And I was a little overwhelmed by this man because it was my first time meeting someone who had quite an extensive stint in prison and I was all of 23, for God's sakes, I was a baby. And he walked in and he was a strapping man. He was a very handsome man and he gave me a gift. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. What's this about? And he said, I wanted to thank you for actually including me in all the correspondence that you could in relation to my boys. You were the only person while I was in prison that gave me any updates as to what was happening with the boys. And I don't believe I was doing anything extraordinary at that point. It was pretty much within the realm of serving the guardianship parents, and he still had guardianship of his boys. But it was a lesson that has stuck with me over 35 years now. I'll never forget that moment. Goes into the same volume of you coming up to me and telling me that I'm triggering you because I remind you of your dad.
Yeah.
And he was made out to be a monster from all of the reports that I had read and everything that I had heard about him. And yet this simple thing about keeping him informed about his boys was an incredible thing for him. Like, it meant a lot to him. He felt that he was being treated as a person. Now, I also needed then to assess him and see if he was safe to be around the boys. So I had a long-term plan in mind that I knew I had to have him engaged in order, upon his release, to determine whether he caused a risk to the children. So that was also playing in my mind. I can't engage someone if I have absolutely no rapport with them and I haven't given them any reason to trust me. So from a worker perspective, that was in my mind. But from a rights perspective, a child's rights, as well as the parental right, that was another big contributor to my action.
No, that's quite an inspiring story. And I think a lot of the times just treating people with dignity and respect can go a really long way, especially when someone's been outcast like that. So, yeah, no, I think that speaks volumes, and it's nice to be acknowledged. And that's certainly something that I find in talking to you, Toni, is you're always very generous with your acknowledgement of people and people's steps and, I guess, transformation and what they do. And I can hear there's a sincerity in the acknowledgement. Yet at the same time, I feel like there's probably a intentionality behind being, I guess, having those acknowledgements. So where do you see acknowledgement plays a part in transformation?
It's actually a science to this. It takes, forget the actual figures, but something to this effect. At work, in order to feel appreciated, you need to be acknowledged 4 to 5 times. Good things being said about you 4 to 5 times will resonate, but it needs to be said that many times for it to resonate. versus one negative. One negative spirals you right back, but it takes 4 to 5 positives to actually boost your self-esteem and your skill set, your belief in self. At home, it's always harder at home, it doubles. You've actually got to say nice things 7 or 8 times to counteract one negative. So you've got to say to the kids, oh, good on you. Thank you for cleaning the dishes. And thanks for getting out of bed. And thanks for having a shower today, versus the one comment that you make going, could you come downstairs and get your clothes and take them upstairs? They've been sitting down here for a whole week. And that unravels the 7 or 8 good things that you might have said. And basically, again, human nature, it's the way our brains are programmed. We are programmed to hear negativity and we overemphasize negativity. Someone can tell us we are incredibly skilled at our job and we're great at making money and we're great at engaging people. And then we could hear a comment about our report writing skills need to be improved. And that's all we've heard. We've heard that the report writing skills aren't up to speed, aren't up to standard, and you wipe out all the other stuff that you're doing brilliantly at.
Yeah, no,
So-
I've seen that, and I do that myself. I'm so focused on trying to get it perfect. I'll get the 95%, and all I'm focused on is I didn't get 100. There's that 5% missing, and that's what I'm so focused on, rather than the 90% that I did really well. So I understand that.
Quite often I've learned how to tell people they suck in a very nice way as well. Okay. And that there is a talent in it. There is a skill set that you learn, because it's all about words. It's all about the way we construct our sentences and form our words, to give someone feedback without invalidating them. Okay. And I've heard that somewhere before, but it rings true. It's actually the neatest way I've ever heard it said, that feedback is gold, but you must do it without invalidating the individual. And so I test this out on my kids all the time, and my kids are just moving into their 20s, and I've mucked up quite a lot. And maybe mucked up is not the right word. It took a lot of practice to get to the point of actually making it work in the right way. And I was really conscious of it. And now I've got to the point that I don't need to do it consciously. It's something that I genuinely do, because I'm still advocating that someone needs to improve. I'm not holding back, because I'd be robbing them an opportunity if I did. But I have learned how to say it in a way that is acceptable, that the other 4 things that I said that they were really, really good at don't get wiped out.
No, that's it definitely is a skill, because I can see that I've developed that over time as well. Even just in relationships and talking to kids or talking to your partner, and you mention
Exactly.
a bit of feedback, and all of a sudden they're all defensive, and then it doesn't lead anywhere, versus just creating that space of, there's nothing wrong here, but I've got a suggestion on how we might be able to improve something. Would you be open to hearing it? And it opens it up in such a more constructive way. You get the result, they hear it, you get the result. It's better for everyone.
I would just say, really, where you've exceeded is when you're able to get them to say it without you saying it. How could it have run differently? How could it have been different? What could you have done differently? And they actually see it. They actually see that whole ugly mess, an argument that's just happened, if they had just made a different decision or said a different word or tone, it could have changed the whole horrible, awkward moment or event.
Yeah. No, that's a good insight, actually, because it's very easy to sometimes point something out to someone, but when they discover it for themselves, or at least admit it themselves, there's a level of ownership that's not there when someone else points it out.
And that's about taking responsibility. It's absolutely about taking responsibility for your own behaviours, your own actions, your own language that contributed to whatever that event or episode became.
I've been really privileged to work with you in a coaching capacity, and you've got an extensive sort of breadth of skills and the ability to really help guide me. And you mentioned earlier that transformation on your own takes a long, long time. Now, I'm in a position where I'm connected to you, I can afford your rates, and I can work with you. If you've got somebody who's really struggling financially, but they know that there's some key things they need to work through, and they're looking to go through a transformational journey without necessarily engaging a professional coach like yourself, where should they be looking? Where should they be starting? What could they be doing to really work through some of these blocks that perhaps are holding them back from maybe achieving the finances they want, or having the relationships they want, or achieving the goals that they set out?
We are in an age where information is available like never before. And so podcasts and self-help books, there are blogs. There is so much material that it actually feels overwhelming, and you can often get people contradicting one another too. So my suggestion would be to listen to a few individuals, find someone who resonates with you, and have them become your mentor for a while through all of the free material that's available. Don't try and take on too much. Quite often people are trying to change too much all at once. You know, weight loss, for instance, can be such an arduous thing for people because it isn't just about energy in and energy out. What you're going to be undoing and what you're going to be focusing on, let's say for weight loss, is understanding what your relationship is to food. If you're someone who fluctuates up and down with their weight, what is the relationship to food? What does it give you? What are the triggers? Really becoming a student of your behavior and your reaction to the thing that you're wanting to change, be it being more influential at work, or a better relationship with your partner, or a better relationship with your children, or being more patient, less irritable. Each one of those things is a study in and of themselves. And eventually, once you start unpacking a few of them, you'll see the interconnected tentacles between them, and that one can lead to the other. But you need to start with one thing and find that mentor that aligns with your values and the messages seem to be really clearly coming through, and just take on all of the free material. There is this woman who I've done some work with, and she's very expensive. She generally has white-collar professional women. She only works with women. And I wasn't able to afford her for very long. I took four sessions with her earlier on in my career. And I encountered a woman I used to work with who was in an entry-level position at my work. And we got talking one day, and all of a sudden I found out that she knew about this woman as well. She had never had any paid sessions with her. She just followed her, listened to all of her free material, and she had actually been promoted twice since she had been following this particular well-known coach off LinkedIn and off YouTube.
I've probably done that with quite a few coaches over the years, where you digest all of their free content, and it does seep in. But I think that community and having someone to talk to, like you said earlier, does help as well. So, I mean, I know for me, by having similarly growth-driven individuals around me to talk about this stuff with, also made a huge difference compared to just trying to do it on your own and do it in secret. I'm going to secretly try to transform and grow myself versus actually let me share with people and bounce ideas off of. So I think surrounding yourself with those great people to transform together with can also make a big difference.
Absolutely. And you could do those at business events and even girlfriends and guy friends that you've grown up with. But it is about increasing your self-awareness and being prepared to look at what of your behavior keeps the same behavior being the same reaction that people have to you occurring. What do you bring to the situation? And that doesn't mean we've got to toss out the whole lot of ourselves. It's just about understanding what is the thing that's holding you back. That's the biggest thing at the moment that worries you. Having some time, focus on it, make a study of it, and then get to a place where you feel like you've moved on from where you were. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's not impossible either. There's difficulties even if you have a one-to-one coach. The benefit of a one-to-one coach is that it's bespoke to you. It's your specific issues being discussed in the context of a framework or whatever it is that relates to your block. And then the solution is bespoke to you, because it is about pulling out what is in your subconscious, that is the solution that's sitting there, so you can take action to it rather than continuously be a visitor to it. A
Mm.
lot of people are visitors to their lives, but in order to be engaged, you need to take action.
Yeah, I think what you talk to there is the solution's inside ourselves already. So it's not like the coach is coming in and putting something in you. It's really they're there to sort of extract what's already underneath the solution. You already know the solution inside yourself in most cases that's going to get you there. And it's really the right questions and the right space that they give you to really help you explore that yourself. So I know you did that with me. And I've got one final question. And this is probably talking to where I had some of the biggest breakthroughs with you. And I'd just love for you to share some of what you shared with me around this. So I was struggling with boundaries. I didn't have firm boundaries. I was a real pushover. I wanted to people please. I didn't want to upset anyone. And I had pretty much lived my life for other people. And I got put to the bottom of the totem pole. I was the last one. Once everybody had all of my energy and all of my time and all of my money, whatever scraps were left over would just, I'd try and enjoy a few moments here and there. And I was super righteous about it. And I thought I was such a good person. And you really helped me see that there was a better way. And that by having clear boundaries, I could really put myself first. And by doing that and looking after myself, it would really energize me to then be able to really give and contribute to others in a much more meaningful way. I'd love for you to just talk about some strategies. If someone's dealing with boundary issues like I was, where should they start? What should they do?
In order to set boundaries, you need to do the preliminary work first. You need to understand what makes you unhappy or what's causing the pain point in your life that you're seeking change over, and how that makes you feel, because the boundaries are how you get to the other side. And you talked about the people pleasing. Now, people pleasing highlights a couple of things. It highlights an undertone of anxiety and also a self-esteem issue about everyone else is more important and I'm and not enough. Or it could also indicate that I can get by on so much less than what everyone else needs. I don't need all that stuff. I'm all right. I'm strong, without recognizing the depletion that's happening in you. And so the first thing that needs to happen is understanding what's working for you, what's serving you, and what isn't. And in order to set boundaries, it's usually about what's not serving you that needs a boundary in place to change, so that you are then getting what you need to energize yourself to get to the goals that you're looking for. And so those boundaries can be as simple as get to bed at 9:30 every night, so your sleep hygiene is better and that you've got more energy for the rest of the day. And then it could be much more complex in walking away from a whole stream of friends who are doing activities that aren't good for you. And they can equally be as difficult as the other for some individuals. So it's really exploring about what is no longer serving you, because some of the things that we've done for 10 years may have been necessary to do to get us through. But if it's having an unintended consequence now, or it had an unintended consequence for a while, it's time to examine it. It's time to ask yourself why it is that you do it and look for an alternative action to take. Now, once you've determined that, how do you get supported in it? What do you do to support yourself in maintaining the boundary? Because that is the rocket science to change. It's the mathematical formula that takes up all the blackboard and you don't understand a bloody word of it, because that is where the gold is being supported to enact the change. And that's where you need a trusted person or systems in place to support you to keep that boundary. Smartwatches. It might be having a chat with your partner to send you off to bed. It may be finding that friend who'll stop you going back to the old friends so you're not engaging in those behaviours you know are not good for you. But there are things that need to happen that will support you in that decision making you've made. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like I said, it's made a massive difference in my life. Yeah, the ability to actually set and stick to boundaries. And really, it's like, what will I and won't I accept in my life? And having that list has given me a lot of clarity rather than having to accept things as they present themselves. There's almost a predetermined list of, well, this is this is kind of where I stand on things, and this is where the boundary is. And if it's on this side of the line, it's okay. And if it's on the other side, it's not. And yeah, and just being able to have those conversations and be okay with it has just drastically improved relationships, unlike anything I would have thought. So no, thank you for that skill that you taught.
I think reflecting on some of the boundaries that you've put in place, I think there's been variations on some of those where some have been easy for you to come to and you go, oh, I just need to do that. Oh my God, of course, I shouldn't do that anymore. I'm going to have a chat with that person and say, I can't do that anymore with them. But others did need more, a firmer conversation about roles and responsibilities of others that fall on you as an adult, as a parent, as a partner. Do you know the distinction that I'm making?
Yeah, a lot of the boundaries that were difficult to put in place were the ones that were going to affect other people. And for me, it was the perception of, oh, if I put that boundary in place, they're not going to like me. They're going to get hurt. There's going to be some issue. They've been relying on me so much for this for so long, and I'm going to take this away now because it doesn't serve me. I'm so concerned about how it's going to affect other people. Because like I've said, I've been putting them first for so long. But yeah, there came a point where it's just like, no, this is it. I'm going to put this in place and just deal with the consequences. And, I think you helped me muster up the courage to actually see that I was worth it and there was that value in myself. And ultimately, they were also missing out in the long run because I was putting myself last and I was draining myself and I was doing those things. So
there were two aspects that were very exceptional with you in that instance, because you really did put some very difficult boundaries in place, is your communication with the individual that was going to be impacted. You didn't just do it. You actually went up to each of those individuals. There were 3 instances I can think of that were particularly difficult, most difficult, and you explained it to them. And you made it very clear to them about the rationale, the intention, and the reasons why it had to happen. And you didn't have fear about that. Your level of communication was exceptional, and I would hold that up as one of a critical component of setting a boundary in place, is allowing others to know that you're going to put it in place and why it's important to you. And you actually did take action quickly. You didn't allow it to fester or continue on. Once you were resolved that that was the correct path, you did it quickly and put structures in place to make it successful.
yeah, no, thanks for that. I like to act quick, that's for sure.
You too.
But yeah, look, thank you so much for your time today, Toni. So if anyone was wanting to learn a little bit more about what you do or connect with you, where can people find out a little bit more?
I have a website called Epic Transformations with an s.com.au, and my phone number is 0403 132238. Happy to have a chat. That initial chat's always one where we can just determine whether we'd be a good match to each other.
Excellent. And yeah, if anyone is considering getting, they're dealing with some stuff, they're stuck on stuff, they've been stuck for a while and they're trying to figure out how they can stop doing the thing they, want to stop, but they can't, Toni helped me immensely. So would highly recommend her services. But yeah, thank you for your time today, Toni, and we'll talk again soon.
Pleasure, Ben. Thank you.
No worries.